All right, a few quick thoughts on chapters 35 and 36, which I think are your last chunk for the week. So let's talk about these really quickly. Again, the big conflict here is the difference between why Huck is trying to get Jim out and why Tom is trying to get Jim out. On the bottom of 237, we see Tom's kind of whole thesis statement, which is yada yada yada. This whole thing is just so easy and awkward as it can be, and so it makes it so rotten difficult to get up a difficult plan. So Tom is just everything he does, he wants to make this more difficult because then he will get more glory, which we'll talk more about in a second. He's all about like the adventure being like good for him, whereas like Huck is kind of starting to follow Tom, but his original intent was just to get his friend out quickly and safely. But of course, that's not what we're doing because that's not the romantic way to do it. Tom goes on to say, you got to invent all the difficulties. Well, we can't help it. He's sad, right? But they have to invent difficulties. So again, they could easily get Jim out, but they're not. We've got to do the best what we can with the materials we've got. Anyhow, there's one thing. There is more honor in getting him out through a lot of difficulties and dangers. So again, why is Tom doing this? Because it's good for him. Because it gives him what he considers honor. There are all sorts of ridiculous things. Tom wants to cut Jim's leg off because he doesn't really care about Jim, and because that makes it more romantic, it makes it more adventurous. This is a game for him, right? He's trying to make up rope ladders and difficulties where they don't exist. Because, as he says on the bottom of page 239, he's got to have a rope ladder. They all do. Who's they? People in stories, people in these ridiculous tales that Tom has heard that he is trying to imitate because I think that that's what's the right thing to do. He wants to leave clues for people. He goes on and like halfway down to 40, he tells Huck that Huck is ignorant and being ridiculous. And so then we as the author or the reader are supposed to go, okay, who's the ignorant one? Who's the ridiculous one right here? There are all sorts of examples of like Tom inventing things. Jim has to have a journal because all prisoners have journals. He needs to, have things that are stolen for him because that's how he needs to dig himself out with a knife and not a pick because that's how you do things. But then on page 242, I'm just going to kind of summarize this. We see Tom's weird morality. He's okay with stealing anything to make this impossible or this very possible escape feel more impossible. But then when Huck steals a watermelon, Tom makes him pay for it because it's not something they need for the escape. So again, we just see this like strange morality, right? Neither of these boys are bad people, but they have like it's a weird morality. Like it's a weird line that is drawn, and Huck seems to err more on the like people side, and Tom seems to err more on the like things side, right? Like it's not right to steal something that you don't need. You have to pay for that. So just again, keep paying attention to that, to all the ways that Huck tries to say like, Tom, your plan is foolish, and Tom's like, no, this is the right way to do it. There's a part on page 243 where Tom is giving an example of somebody who took 37 years to dig out of a fortress in China, and Huck says, Jim don't know nobody in China, so like, why would we do it that way? And it's fascinating because Tom says, what's that got to do with it? What does Jim have to do with this escape? Well, he's the one who you're trying to help escape, and yet Tom doesn't seem to get that or care. And so then again, on page 244, Tom decides that they can kind of take the easy way out, but they have to let on to ourselves that we were at it for 37 years. So he says, it's okay, we'll do it the quick way, but we have to pretend that we did it the hard way because who is this escape about? It's about Tom. It's about the glory and the adventure and the romanticism that Tom feels for himself. Tons more examples of that in the rest of the chapter. Tom feels like it's right and moral to do it this way. If you're going to help a prisoner escape, you have to do it the right way. But again, it's backwards. There are a million examples of that. But then Huck says he doesn't care on the bottom of 245. I don't care shucks for the morality of it, no how. When I start to see a nigger, a watermelon, or a Sunday school book, I ain't no ways particular about how it's done. So Huck doesn't care about how they do it. He just cares that it's done. I don't love his examples of stealing like watermelon from people or Sunday school books, but I appreciate the way that he tries. He just wants Jim out, right? He just wants the job done. So again, this stark contrast, this foil between Tom, who does it for the romantic reasons, he wants the adventure, and Huck who says, I just want to have it done, right? Stark contrast there. But then, on page 246, Huck talks about how Tom is full of principle because even though he's going to start using a pick to break Jim out, he's pretending that pick is a knife, right? And Huck is really impressed by this. Like, wow, he's such a good person for sticking to his principles. Like, really, he's just lying to himself. I don't know. It's ridiculous. There are a lot more examples there. Huck, and I'm just going to let you read them as I continue on to point out some other things. On page 248, Jim said he couldn't see no sense in most of it, so they're, giving all these ridiculous requests to Jim. You need to steal these things, you need to write in this journal, you need to do this. Jim said he couldn't see no sense in most of it, but he allowed that we was white folks and knowed better than him, so he was satisfied, and he said he would do all as Tom said. So again, we as the reader are supposed to go, Jim is an adult man. We've seen him be, smart and wise and caring over and over and over, and yet, in this ridiculous moment, both Huck and Jim, who I think are good people, are deferring to Tom because he is so full of confidence. He is so full of the idea that his ideas are right, that they're like, that Huck follows Tom and then Jim follows them both because they're white and they must know right. So again, I think Tom, good night. I think Mark Twain is trying to say something to us about, who are we listening to, right? And why are we listening to those people? Is it just because they're whatever the equivalent is of white is, right? I think that's a big question we're supposed to be asking here. Why do we do what we do? Why do we follow who we follow? Are we being intentional? Are we thinking about all of those things? There are way more examples in there that I'll keep scooting past. And then at the end of the chapter, Tom finds a way to make things more romantic. He convinces the slave who had been feeding Nat is his name. He convinces Nat that there are witches, and so Tom's like, oh, I'll help you get rid of the witches, but now I'm going to bake everything that goes to Tom. I'm going to make a bunch of things, or to Jim, and you can't touch any of them. And so he starts putting items that he needs in Jim's food and convinces him that it's a good idea. So again, they could, they're in now, they dug under, they could just help Jim escape. They could just give him the things that he needs, but they don't. They leave him there because that feels more adventurous to Tom. Anyway, so there are all sorts of things for you to keep looking at in there, but those are the big thoughts, and I think some of the things that Mark Twain wants us to notice. As always, let me know if you have questions. I like you. You're great. I hope the things are going well, and have a good day.